I remember the prickling sense of dread that flooded my body the moment he came home late again, his eyes shining with a strange blend of excitement and guilt. My husband, my steady, predictable 9-to-5 husband, stood in our dimly lit living room, announcing that he had fallen in love with someone else. And not just anyone, a woman half his age, brimming with youth and promise, who, in his words, made him feel alive. Those words struck me like a punch to the gut. I clutched the back of the couch, fighting for balance as he confessed his plan to leave me. My vision blurred with tears, my heart thudding with disbelief. I wanted to scream, to rage, but all I managed was a whisper, "How could you?" He looked away as though my pain was too much for him to bear. Then he left, taking our marriage and my sense of security with him. I'm Miranda, and for nearly 15 years, I believed I'd found my forever in Thomas. We met when we were both in our 20s, he a bit older, me fresh out of grad school. He was gentle and responsible, maybe not the most spontaneous man, but I prized his stability. We built a life in a little house on Pine Street, adopting a cat named Ginger, hosting cozy dinners for friends. He'd often tease me about my love for old movies, while I teased him for his obsession with collecting vintage vinyl records. The comfort of our ordinary life felt like a sturdy anchor, or so I assumed. But after we passed the decade mark in our marriage, I sensed a restlessness growing in him. He started going to the gym obsessively, fussing over new clothes, complaining that we never did anything exciting. I tried to meet him halfway, planned weekend trips, suggested new hobbies, but he dismissed my efforts with vague discontent. I never once imagined he was on the brink of betrayal. Yet, little hints emerged. Late-night texts he hid, sudden phone calls that ended when I entered the room, a shift in how he looked at me, more impatience, less warmth. Then came the night he admitted to an affair with a woman named Brianna. He didn't sugarcoat it. She was vibrant, spontaneous, full of dreams he felt he'd lost. Her age? He told me matter-of-factly that she was in her early 20s, barely out of college. The shock of that fact alone made me feel painfully old, though I was only in my late 30s. He insisted he couldn't deny this connection, as if my years of loyalty and shared history were dust on a shelf. He packed a suitcase, promising he'd sort out the rest of his stuff when we could talk calmly. That was the last time I saw him in our home that suddenly felt cavernous and silent. The first few days were a blur of tears and unanswered questions. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, reaching for a presence that no longer existed beside me. The bed felt cold, the shadows in the bedroom seemed to loom larger. My parents, upon hearing the news, were outraged, urging me to file for divorce immediately. My best friend, Lila, tried to keep me company, cooking me comforting meals I mostly left untouched. Despite their support, a hollow ache consumed me. I'll never forget the text he sent a week later, "I'm sorry it had to end like this. Brianna and I are truly in love." Reading those words, I felt a potent mix of rage and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to retort with vicious insults, but I refrained, too weary to feed his narrative. Instead, I simply replied, "I hope you find whatever you're looking for." Then I set my phone down, determined not to let my sorrow become his entertainment. Word spread among our circle, dividing friends and acquaintances. Some people reached out with pity, others asked intrusive questions about her age and how I felt. I hated being the subject of gossip, of whispered pity whenever I ran into someone at the grocery store. My therapist, a calm-voiced woman named Nina, reminded me that I had every right to grieve. But I also had the power to define how I moved forward. Slowly I embraced that. I began boxing up Thomas's leftover belongings, deciding if I wanted to toss them or store them. I ended up piling them in the garage, uncertain if I was ready for such a final purge. Meanwhile, updates about Thomas and his new love trickled back to me through the grapevine. He'd apparently moved into an apartment in a trendier part of the city, near bars and clubs that catered to a younger crowd. She, Brianna, posted photos of them on social media. Him wearing slick new outfits, her sporting radiant smiles, the pair of them at concerts or fancy restaurants. He looked uncomfortable but tried to appear thrilled, perhaps to prove he could keep up with a woman half his age. Each picture was like a knife twisted a bit more in my chest, though I told myself not to peek. My fingers couldn't resist scrolling, needing to understand how easily he replaced me. One evening, out of the blue, I got a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, I answered, half expecting a telemarketer. Instead, a young-sounding female voice said, "Is this Miranda?" My pulse quickened. "Yes," I replied. "Who's asking?" The woman introduced herself as a co-worker of Brianna's, hesitating as she explained she felt weird reaching out, but she thought I deserved to know certain things. My heart pounded, unsure if this was a prank. She claimed that Brianna had boasted about her new relationship with a middle-aged guy, flaunting how she was going to live the high life. But apparently the coworker overheard Brianna's real plan, to dig deeper into Thomas's finances, maybe glean money or valuables from him. Something about leverage, some comment Brianna made about how older men are easy to manipulate. I listened mouth dry. The coworker apologized if she was overstepping, but said she felt uneasy watching Brianna brag about scamming an older man. She explained that Brianna already had a track record with short-lived sugar daddies, discarding them once she got what she wanted. I thanked her, voice trembling, trying to keep composure. After we ended the call, I sat in stunned silence. Could it be that this fling Thomas believed in so passionately was actually a con? A wave of conflicting emotions rolled over me, concern for him, an ex-husband who betrayed me, mixed with an undercurrent of bitter satisfaction. If he was being conned, that was the bed he made. Yet I couldn't quite relish the idea of him being harmed, no matter how deeply he'd hurt me. Days later, I found myself reflecting on the irony. He left me for someone half his age, presumably with more excitement. Now there were whispers that she planned to rob him blind. Should I intervene? Warn him? Or should I let him face the consequences of chasing a fleeting fantasy? Torn, I sought advice from Lila, who snorted. He made his bed, let him lie in it. My therapist, more measured, asked how I'd feel if I found out afterwards that everything he owned was taken. Would I regret not giving him a heads up? I wrestled with that question, uncertain if he'd even listen to me if I tried to help. The decision was made for me when, about a month after the breakup, I got a frantic message from Thomas himself. My phone buzzed in the middle of the night, a voicemail from an unknown number. His voice was shaky, apologizing for calling so late but begging me to call back. He said something about being in trouble, that Brianna was gone, that he needed my help. My heart hammered with adrenaline, a swirl of dread and curiosity mixing. Was it all unraveling just as the coworker predicted? I decided to call him back, ignoring the knot in my stomach. He answered on the first ring, exhaling with relief. "Miranda," he croaked, voice thick with distress. I'm sorry to bother you, but she took everything. My bank account is empty, my valuables gone. She played me. Now I have rent due, bills, and she disappeared." He sounded hollow, far from the triumphant man who once smirked that he'd found a new love. "I don't know where else to turn," he said, voice cracking. "I know I treated you horribly, but I'm desperate." I closed my eyes, letting out a shaky breath. The cosmic irony was almost laughable, yet heartbreak overshadowed any humor. He'd left me for greener pastures, mocking my stable, modest life. Now that pasture turned out to be a scorched field, leaving him stranded. The question was, would I step in to help or watch him drown? Part of me felt a fierce triumph in seeing him realize the magnitude of his mistakes. Another part of me, the one that once loved him, couldn't help but feel pity. So I said, "Calm down, Thomas. I can't fix this for you, but tell me what happened." He mumbled how Brianna convinced him to hand over access to certain accounts, took his credit cards, even sold some of his prized vinyl records when he wasn't home. Then she vanished, leaving a curt note. He discovered she'd also run up thousands on his credit lines. His voice trembled with humiliation, as though he couldn't believe he'd been so gullible. I thought she loved me," he choked out. "Guess I'm the fool." I sighed, the memory of his final words to me echoing in my mind. I can't live this boring, broke life anymore. Now he was truly broke. I told him to gather any documentation he had, receipts, statements, whatever might help him prove the fraud. "I'm not sure how much help I can be," I added. "But if you need advice, I'll try." He thanked me profusely, shame-coding every syllable. We arranged to meet the next day at a coffee shop, ironically the same one where he'd boasted about a new future with her a few months ago. I arrived first, ordering a simple latte, heart pounding. He showed up, shoulders slumped, face gaunt. He'd lost weight, dark circles shadowing his eyes. He offered a weak attempt at a smile. "Hey," he said softly. "Thanks for meeting me." "I'm so sorry about everything." I took a breath, motioning for him to sit. "I'm still furious at you," I said, voice steady. "But I'm also not heartless. If you got scammed, you need to know your legal options." He nodded, tears glistening. "I don't blame you if you hate me. I hate myself right now. I believed her so completely that I alienated everyone, including you. And now, she's just gone." We spent the next hour going over his financial statements. Sure enough, multiple large withdrawals, credit lines opened in his name, suspicious charges. She'd systematically drained him. At one point, he rubbed his temples, tears tracking silently down his cheeks. "I left my marriage for this," he whispered. God, I was so blind. A swirl of complicated emotion tightened my chest. I offered him the name of a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. You might recoup something, though it's a long shot, I said. You'll probably have to freeze your accounts, alert your credit card companies. Maybe file a police report, see if they can track her. He listened, voice trembling with gratitude. I can't believe after all I did, you're helping me. I shrugged, not sure how to articulate the swirl of bitterness and pity inside me. I'm doing what feels right, I managed. Doesn't mean I forgive you. But I can't watch you drown while you beg for a life preserver. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. Thank you. Truly. In the days that followed, he updated me on his progress, contacting the lawyer, filing reports. Each time we talked, I struggled with my own conflict. Relief that he'd faced the consequences of chasing an illusion, guilt for feeling that relief, and a strange sense of closure in seeing him so humbled. A part of me realized I was no longer the powerless one. Now he was the one who lost everything, ironically the same situation he once mocked me for. Life's irony can be harsh, but maybe that's how some lessons get learned. Eventually, he managed to freeze some accounts before she siphoned them entirely. The police took his statement, though the chances of catching Brianna or recouping his stolen assets seemed slim. He asked if there was any chance of us reconciling. My heart clenched, remembering the times he'd mocked me for being too safe, for not living a lavish life. I told him I couldn't imagine returning to that dynamic. He nodded, voice heavy with regret. I understand, he said. I burned that bridge, didn't I? We parted with a sort of truce, him thanking me for at least guiding him through the aftermath of a con. He offered to pay me back for any help I'd given once he stabilized, though I told him it wasn't about money. The heartbreak he left me with was something time would have to heal. He never openly asked to move back in with me, perhaps sensing that was out of the question. My trust was gone. My focus lay in building a life free from his scorn and illusions. The last I heard, he found a small room to rent, picking up extra hours at a new job just to keep afloat. The fancy condo dream died the day Brianna disappeared with his accounts. And me? I'm still here, living my quiet life in the house we once shared. Some days I resent that I can't fully celebrate his downfall, but a bigger part of me feels oddly at peace. He learned the hard way that chasing a younger, more exciting partner can backfire catastrophically. Meanwhile, I discovered a resilience I never suspected I had. Does that mean I'm happy about everything that happened? No. Betrayal always leaves scars. But seeing him beg me for help, after ridiculing my supposed lack of ambition, offered a closure I never believed I'd find. I hold no illusions about a fairy tale ending. He remains the man who broke my vows. I remain the woman who endured the heartbreak. But at least now, I stand on firmer ground, no longer overshadowed by the sting of his departure. I learned that sometimes, the illusions that lead people astray eventually consume them. In his case, the woman half his age took everything he owned. In my case, I walked away with my pride and dignity, free to shape a future where my worth isn't defined by someone else's misguided quest for novelty.